Business Spotlight, brought to you by Cross Rhythms and Baba Baboon.
I'm Sonia Farrell and this is Business Spotlight in partnership with Cross Rhythms City Radio and Baba Baboon. Joining me in the studio this week is the lovely Danny Wareham of consultancy firm Firgun. Before we go anywhere, Danny, I want to know, have I said that and pronounced that right of your company?
It is pretty close, Sonia. It's closer than most people get it. So it is a Hebrew word, so I don't expect a natural English speaker to get it. It's Firgun.
Firgun.
So it's kind of halfway between fur and fear.
Brilliant. And Danny, you yourself, you're a business psychologist, a coach, a speaker, and you believed that happy bees make tasty honey. Again, can you just explain to everybody who's listening, what does that, in brief, actually mean?
So in life and in business, it's natural for us to focus on the honey, on the output. Mm-hmm. So we tend to look at things like our profit, our margin, our expenditure. Whereas I believe that if you have the right people, the right environment, the right support, the right culture, then actually performance takes care of itself. And that's kind of the metaphor of happy bees make tasty honey. Look after your people in a certain way and purposefully, and everything else will take care of itself.
So say you're in business, you're in the workplace, or you're a manager, you're a business owner, and you're looking at different ways to say, we'll put it in inverted commas for this one, but team building. Mm-hmm. So engaging, employee engagement, how does that work? And what are your opinions on what employee engagement actually stands for?
So great question. And it's one that's a lot of businesses misinterpret. So when we think of employee engagement, we tend to think of fun, and that can manifest as ping pong tables and pizza Fridays, but it can also appear in things like let's have new uniforms, let's have pay rises, dogs in the office, half a day for well-being, and these other what we call artifacts. But engagement is not necessarily fun. Engagement is about how do you engage your employees, all of your people, in a specific vision and strategy, and then what are the behaviors, the actions, the decision making that help your strategy be successful. We've all been in organizations, I'm sure, where they've ran a recognition event or an incentive or an awards, or they've had a fun day. And I'm not saying those things are bad, they're absolutely fabulous. But afterwards, what now? Have you really driven any sustainable change and sustainable improvement in your business? Or have you just done a nice, what I call a shiny, which was fun for that time, and you might see a little spike in performance, but did it really help you achieve your organizational strategy?
Yeah, it's almost like, from how you're describing it, and just something I'm going to relate to there, Danny, in different organisations I've worked in. I remember one time this organisation, don't get me wrong, fantastic, had some great times, and they did certain team building. One of them was go-karting, and the team got together. We weren't a massive team, there was about 15 of us, and we all had a fantastic day, great day, but then the next day, just like you've described there, I totally get it, because the next day, all those issues and the people who they're going off sick or this, that and the other, they are still there. It doesn't actually change. It's almost like, I'll call it like a quick buzz.
It is. It's like, if you don't know where you're heading, if you don't have a vision and direction, then how do you align the behaviours towards that? And when we don't have that, what we tend to do is things that we think are nice, novel or quirky. And there's nothing necessarily inherently bad about those things. That everybody loves a pizza. Everybody loves a go-karting day. The question is, if you're going to strategically build a culture of engagement, if you're going to strategically deliver better performance, then how do you do that strategically without just throwing perks and pizzas and beanbag furniture at it?
So on that then, what is the difference between employee engagement and all those nice little, frilly things that are there that you can do, sort of, again, inverted commas, in team building? What is culture and how does that differ?
So again, a very deep question. Culture doesn't have an accepted definition, but broadly it is the unwritten rules of how we get things done here. So in the real world, there's nothing in the highway code that says you have to flash your lights to let somebody out. Yeah, everybody does it because that's just how we do things here. And businesses and your social groups, your family will have things that just happen and you just behave a certain way, or your language is a certain way, your decision making is a certain way, just because that's how we get things done around here. culture is made up of lots of different facets that influence how we see those behaviors. So for example, it can be things like the language that we use, the symbols that are in our organizations. It can be the things that just happen, the rituals that just happen. For example, you've driven here today. How often do you park in exactly the same space? There's no rule that says that, but psychologically that's kind of a crutch, a habit that we attach ourselves to. How many times I used to work at a telecoms company many decades ago, and there was a member of management that whenever there was a time to have a disciplinary or grievance hearing, they would always wear a certain colour tie.
Right.
I don't know if they did that consciously, but the message that symbol sent across the rest of the contact centre completely changed what I call the smell of the place. You saw different behaviours happen. You saw fear and command and control, and people would just keep their heads down and hope it's not them. All of that from a tie.
Yeah. So those little, like you say, is playing on the psychology of staff. And those sort of things, I mean, how can they, not just only for somebody's happiness within the workplace, but if culture is sort of, a bad culture, and again, I'm going to ask you to elaborate on what is a good and a bad culture, but if that is what is happening within an organisation, what kind of negative impact can that actually have as well?
So a slightly controversial answer, that I don't believe that there are good or bad cultures.
Okay.
And what I mean by that is, if you think of culture as being a tool, does it help you achieve your strategy or not? In which case it's either a match tool or a mismatch. If you look at a culture for crisis management, might be very specialised, so you're not going to do much, but you're going to do it really well. You don't need to know what else is going on in the organisation, so there doesn't need to be high trust. It's very opaque. You're going to be managed by objective, very hierarchical. That's a great culture for the army.
Yep.
If you put the army's culture into Google, who require innovation, then you stop all innovation. However, if you put Google's let's try things and fail fast into the army, then some borders are going to change. So culture is not good or bad. It's contextual of, does it help you achieve your goals or not?
So it's for different culture for different organisations.
Exactly.
Is that what you say? Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay.
And it can be incredibly influential. People, I don't think, realise just how influential. But if I give you an example of, if you look at the West Coast Main Line, the trains.
Okay.
Avanti West Coast took over from Virgin about 5 years ago. Now, on paper, they are the same company. It's the same staff in the same stations, same trains, pretty much the same timetables. They're on the same terms and conditions because they were two-peat across. So on paper, they're identical companies. So why is the employee experience and the customer experience on the West Coast Main Line so different today compared to what it was 5 years ago? And the reason is that the reason that Virgin exists, their vision, was all about understanding that customers don't get on a train for fun. They're going somewhere. So we're going to be the holiday before your holiday. So the acceptable behaviours that fall out of that are all about sharing information. We're going to tell you the connection times. We're going to tell you what platform you're on. Their reward and recognition schemes were built around customer experience. So what you say you're about drives all of the cultural behaviours that should fall out.
So the values and all those sorts of things you can build into the culture.
Exactly. Now, Avanti's, their reason for existing is that we're a safe pair of hands for our investors. And in that model, there's nothing inherently wrong, but the behaviours that fall out of that are all about operational savings, efficiency, etc. So you have a cohort of employees that signed up to the dream of, with a holiday before your holiday, being asked to behave in a way that is now about efficiency. And as a result, that's where toxicity comes in, because you're asking me to behave in a way that is incongruent with my values. The question is then, which culture is best? What is the vision? Is that applicable? And are you getting the behaviours that help that? Or are you kind of fibbing to yourself that you say you're all about X, but the reality of the day-to-day is incongruent, is different? You're not walking your talk.
Yeah, it's almost like there's a, just from my perspective then, a miscommunication. There's things that aren't aligning throughout the whole business.
Yep.
And is that, you've mentioned a couple of bigger organisations there. What about a smaller business?
So it happens in any social group. So culture is a social phenomenon. It happens whenever you get 3 or more people together. So the way that you behave with your family will be different to when you're out with the girls on a Friday, will be different to when you're with a small group of clients.
Or when I'm at the football.
Or when you're at the football. And your behaviour will change, your actions will change, your language will change. You're still you, but you're influenced by the environment that you're in. And culture happens whether you're a 10,000-seater contact centre or whether you're a small CIC. And with small businesses, often they are, particularly micro businesses that are kind of fewer than 10 employees, they tend to have been started because of passion or trauma. So passion in the, I've always wanted to do this, or I love doing this thing. It's a side hustle that I can now monetize. For trauma, it's I can do it better than what I'm doing at the moment. I should start on my own, or I'm just fed up of the life I'm living. I want to do something completely different. Either way, passion and trauma are incredible fuel sources for getting your business off the ground. But then it gets to a point a little while in, it might be a few months, it might be a couple of years, where now the reality of you've got a couple of employees, you've got to keep the lights on, and you've almost sort of lost your identity, lost your way, and that fuel's been expended. Knowing why you exist, knowing what difference you want to make, where you're heading, what you want to be famous for, and having that North Star of a vision can help kind of refocus a business of any size for what are we doing? Why do we do it? So then when questions, the shinies come along of should we invest in this market? Should we accept this client? Should we do X, Y, or Z? It becomes much easier to make those decisions because you know where you're going. And the challenge many businesses have is they don't have that. Why do we exist?
Why? Going back to your why.
They know what they do, but they don't know why they do it. So they end up trying lots of things, which can be expensive. Let's try pizzas. Let's try beanbags. Let's try this social media strategy. Let's try. It all comes back to what's your identity? What do you want to be famous for? And then how do you build a culture that supports that rather than just throwing shiny at it?
And, going back to the shiny, and I'm going to go there linking on to expense as well. If a culture in an organisation is not quite working, it's not working from the staff, from the bottom right up to the top right down to the bottom. I mean, how expensive can that be, again, for a business?
So there's a bit of a double answer here. The irony is that culture change doesn't have to be expensive at all, because it's all about behavior, and you get the behaviors that you tolerate and reward and recognize. You get the behaviors you walk past as well. Changing that behavior isn't expensive at all. However, the cost of having a mismatched culture, it can literally ruin your business. There's a great documentary on Netflix at the moment called The Rise and Fall of Juul. And it's an American company that invented a e-cigarette to replace smoking. So it has a nicotine content. Their vision when they first started was all about how do we save people from the diseases that smoking causes without them having the withdrawal symptoms. So it was very much a social enterprise. If you watch I think it's a 6-part series, by the end, you're probably shouting at the TV because they're doing things, they're making business decisions that are completely incongruent with that. They literally sell to Philip Morris, one of the biggest tobacco companies. And you can see the behaviors play out in the organization as well as their share price, where people are now being asked to behave in a way that they didn't sign up for. You say you're about social endeavor and fighting the big tobacco and saving lives, but all the decisions you're making around how you advertise, they started advertising to very young children, for example, those are incongruent with what you say you're about. And the bigger that difference, the bigger that delta, the more likely it's going to be very expensive to turn the ship around.
So how do we then look at culture when we're looking at leadership? Within it, whether it's an individual, who's seen as a great leader, or actually a business who's seen as a leader in their industry.
So lots of things affect culture. Everybody affects culture, every process, every protocol, but not all are equal. Leaders have possibly the largest influence on the smell of the place. Again, I'm sure you've been in organizations where they've changed your manager or changed the owner even. Yeah. Objectively, it's the same company. You still come in the next day, do the same job for the same people, same pay, but it just feels different.
Yeah, I can agree with that.
Yeah. So the leadership being able, whether that's an individual, whether it's a leadership team, understanding why are we here, what difference do we make, what's that North Star of our vision, and then role modelling the behaviours that they want to encourage that. And more importantly, getting in amongst the rest of the organisation, because culture leaves evidence. What's supporting that, what's helping and what's hindering. And an example might be, I worked with one client who had a whole section in their strategy about employee well-being. Which is fabulous. I'm not here to challenge whether your strategy is right or not. You just tell me what that kind of vision is. When we look in their day-to-day, their canteen only sells yellow food. So it only has chips and pies and so on. They have a contract with a medical provider who comes and does massages at chairs. But for a 1,000-seater operation, they only have 4 appointments a month. So these little things on their own are not necessarily a bad thing, but the more pieces of evidence that tell you that what you say you're about is not what you're actually about, the more likely that cultural wind is going to be blowing in your face and making things a little harder and more expensive.
And you yourself, Danny, we're talking about leadership as well. You yourself are involved a little bit here in what you do and as a speaker and everything, and including, with the Institute of Leadership. How has that come about with you, and why? What's your involvement with that? What's your aim with it?
So I am very privileged to be part of the Institute of Leadership, and it's somewhat a little lucky and serendipitous. So when I came out of the corporate world 4 or 5 years ago, I had a bit of a kind of imposter syndrome of, am I actually any good? I've been in one organisation for a long time, and I was good there, but are those skills translatable elsewhere? So I decided to go and do my master's, and part of my master's, I proposed a new style of leadership that has no leader. So traditionally, I won't give too much away about what's going to be discussed at the Institute of Leadership, but historically, a leader has always been a person. The argument has been, is it their traits and attributes and skills, or is it the situation they're in, or is it the relationships they build? But it's always been a person. My argument is, and this ties in with culture, is a leader's role is to set the direction and create the rules of engagement of how we get things done. If you had a mechanic, a process that was able to establish that purpose and direction, and everybody had the trust that they knew how to get things done, do you need a person to be the leader, or could culture be the leader? And that's what my academic research was into, was can the environment, can the culture replace what we traditionally think of as a leader? And it sounds far-fetched, but we see this all the time in real life. You could argue Port Vale, I know you're a fan, so we'll talk about leadership at Port Vale, shall we? So in any football match, before the game, there is absolutely what we call vertical leadership. So they will discuss a boss figure, we'll discuss tactics, what the aim of the game is, what the specific, it all comes back to tactics, I suppose. I'm not a football fan. I follow Vale too.
I feel your pain.
So before the game, you have vertical leadership. After the game, you have vertical leadership where you have reviews and people are held to account and probably shouted at in the training room and so on. But during the actual game, you could argue that there is no leader. We might call somebody a captain, but the captain is not actually directing things on the field. The goalkeeper plays to their strengths. They play in goal. They're never asked to play up front. They're never asked to play on the wing. So it's all about creating the scenario, creating the environment where you can play to your strengths and you are trusted to deliver. And that's what I'll be talking about at the Institute of Leadership is how do we create the environment where you can play to your strengths, where you can use your superpowers, rather than what we tend to do today is, here's your job description, you do 7 of those 10 things, so actually you need to work on those 3, they're development areas. I'm much more about how do we unleash the strengths that you've got and
identifying the strengths, unleashing them, and like you've just said there, being a team. So you are going to be speaking, Danny. I just want you to mention a little bit about what the event is in June, who's going to be involved and where is it taking place, where you're going to be speaking with the Institute of Leadership.
I am a little shocked. I was approached to speak, which was very flattering in its own right, at the annual event. So the Institute of Leadership is kind of like a governing body over all leadership development across the world. It's a global organisation, and every year they have an annual event. And I was approached, and then I found out that the other speakers all seem to be far more experienced than I am. Maybe that's just my imposter syndrome kicking back in again. But I'll be speaking alongside Olympians Tessa Sanderson, CBE, and also Kate Richardson Walsh, who's an OBE, who was captain of Team GB hockey, 300 plus caps. We have an ex-army major, Neil Judd, who's an OBE as well, and specialises in kidnap for ransom negotiation. And I'll be sharing a stage and highlighting my academic research to, hopefully the crowd won't be asleep, but highlight the academic research to show them if you create the environment, then happy bees do make tasty honey.
Danny Wareham, thank you so much. That's Danny Wareham from the consultancy firm Firgun, if I said that right, here on Business Spotlight in partnership with Cross Rhythm City Radio and Baba Baboon.
Business Spotlight, shining a light on our local business community. Brought to you by Cross Rhythms and Baba Baboon.